Jonathan Luna's story is one of success, dedication, and a mystery that remains officially unsolved to this day. Luna was a 38-year-old assistant U.S. attorney based in Baltimore, Maryland, and a devoted husband and father of two. He had risen from a modest upbringing in the Bronx to a respected position in the justice system and earned a reputation as a diligent, principled prosecutor. On the surface, his life seemed stable, but on one cold December night in 2003, something went terribly wrong, and Luna's life came to a bizarre and tragic end. Jonathan Luna was always determined to succeed, and he excelled in school. He set his sights on law early and followed through with his dream. He earned his undergraduate degree at Fordham University, then attended law school at the University of North Carolina. After graduation, he began his legal career in Washington, D.C., and later served as a prosecutor in Brooklyn in the Big Apple. By the early 2000s, Luna had secured a role as an assistant United States attorney in Baltimore, handling federal prosecutions. In his personal life, he married his wife Angela, and together they had two sons. Beneath the outward signs of success, however, Luna was under pressure. His supervisor in the U.S. Attorney's Office was critical of his performance, and Luna worried about his job security. There were also internal inquiries looming over him, including one involving missing evidence money from an old case that would require him to take a polygraph test. On top of that, Luna had personal financial stress, and he was carrying significant credit card debt. It was against this backdrop of mounting stress that Jonathan Luna went to work on December 3, 2003. December 3, 2003 was a long day, and Luna was in Baltimore's federal courthouse that evening, working on a plea deal in a high-profile case involving a street pharmacist. A trial had been underway, but it was faltering due to a key witness changing their story at the last minute. Luna and defense attorneys negotiated a plea agreement to resolve the case, aiming to present it to the judge the next morning. Sometime around 9:30 that evening, he spoke with one of the defense lawyers and indicated he would finalize the paperwork that night. He said he planned to go home briefly and then finish the plea agreement, promising to have it ready by morning. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Luna left the courthouse. Oddly, he left behind his cell phone and his glasses on his desk, items he usually wouldn't forget, especially since he needed his glasses to drive at night. Instead of driving toward his home in the Maryland suburbs, his silver Honda Accord headed north. Toll and bank records later helped trace a strange journey. Luna's car drove onto I-95 North, away from Baltimore. It passed through Maryland and into Delaware. His electronic toll pass was used at the Delaware Toll Plaza, indicating the car's progress. Just after midnight, Luna withdrew $200 in cash from an ATM at a highway rest stop in Delaware. After that stop, the car continued northeast, but a noteworthy change occurred. His pass card wasn't used again, for reasons which remain unknown. On the New Jersey and Pennsylvania turnpikes, Luna paid cash for toll tickets, as if trying to avoid leaving a trace. By 4 a.m. on December 4th, his vehicle exited the Pennsylvania Turnpike at a rural interchange near Lancaster. Investigators would later find a drop of Luna's blood on the toll ticket from that exit, a sign that he was bleeding by that time. Around 5 a.m. that morning, a worker arriving at a well drilling company in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, about 95 miles from Baltimore, noticed a car in a ditch on the property. The sedan's front end was submerged in a small creek, and its headlights were still on. It was Luna's Honda Accord. The worker saw blood smeared on the car door and called the police. When officers searched the scene, they found Luna's body lying face down in the creek, not far from the car. He was still wearing his suit and overcoat from the night before. The scene was gruesome, and while I don't generally get into the finer details, A quick overview here is necessary since it's material to the analysis of the case. Luna had been stabbed dozens of times, with most of these being relatively shallow cuts and punctures concentrated on his chest and neck. There were also cuts on his hands that looked like possible defensive wounds, and a severe gash had nicked his carotid artery. The blood evidence suggested he had bled significantly inside the car. About $200 in cash, the same amount withdrawn earlier, was found strewn across the back seat, now soaked in blood. Investigators found Luna's own pocket knife near the scene, covered in blood. Ultimately, the autopsy concluded he drowned while bleeding from his injuries. The local Lancaster County coroner quickly ruled Luna's death a slaying, given the multiple injuries and circumstances. Also, keep this ruling in mind, because there are some very different theories of what may have happened, some of which seem virtually incomprehensible. News of a federal prosecutor's mysterious death shocked colleagues in the community. The FBI teamed up with the Pennsylvania State Police to investigate immediately. Early speculation naturally turned to Luna's work. As an assistant U.S. attorney, Luna had prosecuted a variety of dangerous criminals, and some speculated it could have been revenge. The case he was working on that night was one focus. Perhaps someone involved wasn't happy with the plea deal, or blamed Luna for their predicament. However, those particular suspects had no clear motive, as they were about to receive a lenient deal. Nor did the evidence fit a professional hit, and in general, the idea that targeting a specific cog in such a massive machine just isn't done. After all, it's the institution of justice that's targeting these criminals, not any specific individual within it. No suspects emerged, and Luna left no note or clear indication of his intentions. Forensic evidence at the scene and in the car did not identify any unknown person. The timeline of Luna's drive suggested a lone, meandering journey. Months passed with no leads, and investigators began to seriously consider another possibility. About a year after Luna's death, the FBI announced that it had found no evidence of anyone else traveling with Luna or meeting him during his overnight drive. In essence, federal investigators leaned toward the conclusion that Luna had been alone, and that raised the possibility that he may have been responsible for his own fate. The detail that he was due for a polygraph test over the missing money and his significant personal debts suggested to some that Luna was under extreme stress. Friends and colleagues recalled that in the days before his death, Luna seemed anxious and exhausted. Those who knew him couldn't imagine him intentionally doing something to himself. The investigation officially remains open in Pennsylvania, and the Lancaster coroner's ruling that this was a slaying still stands. However, the FBI eventually closed its active inquiry without filing charges, calling the case administratively closed, pending any new evidence. In practical terms, this meant the FBI didn't find sufficient evidence that a third party had been involved. With no definitive answers, 3 theories have continued to be discussed. One is that Luna was slain by an unknown assailant. Those convinced of this point to evidence of a struggle and the sheer improbability of someone stabbing and drowning himself. Cuts on Luna's hands looked like defense wounds, and leaving his glasses and phone at work suggests he left in a hurry or against his will. It's possible he planned to meet someone that night, perhaps an informant, a stranger, or someone from his personal life, and that meeting turned violent. The $200 he withdrew might have been intended for this person. In this scenario, a second person in the car could explain the erratic route and the switch to cash tolls to avoid tracking. The other theory is that Luna's death was essentially self-inflicted. The most direct version of this idea is that he did it in such a way that would conceal that he ended himself. Proponents of this idea note that all his wounds came from his own pocket knife, and many were shallow. Under this theory, Luna was under such immense stress from his job troubles, the impending polygraph, and personal debts that he hatched a desperate plan. Another variant of this idea is that he did do it himself, but had only intended to make it look like a kidnapping. Under this theory, his death was accidental while attempting to pull this off. Still another theory suggests that he had a mental breakdown under the extreme stress he was under and was operating under a delusional framework at the time of his death. This could explain some of his bizarre actions that night. However, running counter to this theory, he had been engaging with defense counsel just fine until late into the night. Today, the death of Jonathan Luna remains unsolved, and while the case is technically open, it has long gone cold. The conflicting theories leave everyone who has looked asking, was Jonathan Luna the target of a crime, or was he a man pushed past his breaking point? Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now let's get back to business. The Hibagon is Japan's own version of Bigfoot, a mysterious ape-like creature said to roam the forests around Mount Hiba in Hiroshima Prefecture. Eyewitness accounts from the early 1970s described a stocky, hair-covered beast about 5 feet tall with a gorilla-like body and a face shaped like an inverted triangle. Unlike the towering Sasquatch of North America, the Hibagon was smaller, roughly human-sized, and often compared to a gorilla or large monkey. The legend of the Hibagon began in the summer of 1970. On the evening of July 20th, 1970, a man driving through the village of Saijo spotted a strange bipedal creature on a mountain road. He described it as an ape-like figure covered in hair, too large to be a local monkey, that quickly lumbered off into the woods. In the days that followed, other residents reported similar encounters. One farmer on July 23rd saw a dark, hairy figure with a human-like face emerge from tall grass. Another man on July 30th mistook a shadowy, gorilla-shaped form for a person walking along a footpath until it turned to look at him, causing the startled observer to flee. These early reports described a creature resembling a gorilla or wild man, walking upright and then disappearing into the dense foliage. By August, local newspapers had picked up the story, and they dubbed the unknown beast Hibagon, referencing its alleged home on Mount Hiba. As word spread, more sightings trickled in. In total, around 12 sightings of the Hibagon were reported in 1970. That winter, a set of unusual footprints was found in the snow on Mount Hiba, adding physical evidence to the mystery. Experts debated whether the tracks were from an unknown animal or simply misidentified bear or human prints. Meanwhile, for the locals, the sense was growing that something bizarre was lurking in the mountains. The combination of eyewitness testimony and enigmatic footprints left villagers both anxious and intrigued by what might be prowling the remote region. In the following years, sightings continued intermittently, feeding what the media dubbed Hibagon fever. Throughout the early 1970s, locals around Mount Hiba occasionally claimed to see the creature, especially in the summer months when people were outdoors in the forests. These encounters were usually fleeting glimpses, a hairy silhouette here, a rustling in the bushes there, but they kept the legend alive. The growing number of reports even prompted the local government to act. In 1970, Saijo Town Hall opened a special consultation desk to handle Hibagon reports and to calm public concerns. A young town official was even tasked with collecting eyewitness accounts and coordinating with police and researchers. The story had gone national. Curious reporters and cryptid enthusiasts flocked to the quiet town in hopes of catching a sight of Japan's answer to Bigfoot. To ease the disruption, the town offered small nuisance payments to locals, compensating them for the flood of media attention on their once sleepy community. Beyond journalists and budding cryptid hunters, investigators from universities and law enforcement also took interest. In 1972, a team from Kobe University arrived to systematically search for the Hibagon. They scoured Mount Hiba for clues, installed camera traps, and analyzed footprints, but came up empty-handed. Police, on the other hand, received reports of hairy trespassers at construction sites, and of course had to investigate the complaints. According to reports, the cops took casts of potential ape footprints, but nothing was ever tied back to this mythical mountain ape. The peak of the frenzy came in 1974, when a flurry of encounters and a piece of photographic evidence brought the Hibagon to its highest prominence. On June 20th, 1974, a driver in Shibara City reported nearly hitting a large, hairy creature that dashed across the road on two legs. A few weeks later, in July 1974, other witnesses described similar ape-like creatures in the area, further stoking the excitement. This witness, an old woman who had lived in the region her whole life, was quite certain that she had seen some sort of very large monkey or ape-like creature. Then, on August 15th, 1974, the most famous incident occurred. A local man named Minoru Mitani actually photographed the Hibagon. Mitani was driving with his mother in the countryside when they saw a grayish bipedal creature by the roadside. He stopped the car and snapped a photo as the creature climbed a persimmon tree, peeking from behind the trunk. The resulting photograph, though blurry and indistinct, claims to show a dark, humanoid shape clinging to the tree. This grainy image made headlines and became the iconic visual of the Hibagon, though skeptics were quick to note that it could depict virtually anything. After that dramatic summer, the mystery began to wane. Sightings dropped off abruptly after late 1974. In total, authorities counted roughly 30 separate encounters during the ape-man fever spanning from 1970 to 1974. Importantly, the creature was never reported to have harmed anyone. It seemed shy, or at least non-aggressive, often fleeing as soon as it was spotted. By early 1975, with no new reports coming in, the town authorities publicly declared the Hibagon disturbance over. The consultation office was closed in June 1975. The junior official manning the office lost perhaps the sweetest job of his life, and the region gradually returned to normal. In the absence of definitive proof, people have proposed many theories about what the Hibagon could have been. The simplest explanation is that it was a case of mistaken identity. Under this theory, the locals were actually seeing known animals. One theory suggests the Hibagon was really a Japanese macaque seen under unusual conditions. This hypothesis suggests it was perhaps an old or large monkey that had strayed from its troop. Japanese macaques are common in the area, but witnesses insisted the creature was far larger and not a typical monkey. Others pointed to a local bear, with an overlay of Bigfoot hysteria. Asian black bears can walk short distances on two legs and have white chest patches, a trait some Hibagon reports noted, so a bear at dusk could resemble an ape-like figure. Further, bears are rarely sighted in the wild, and most people are unaware of just how human they can look when standing up on their hind legs. In fact, in 2023, there was even a case at a zoo in China where the patrons and people on social media thought that a Malaysian sun bear was actually a human in a suit. Now, the creature spotted definitely wouldn't be a Malaysian sun bear unless it escaped from a zoo, but this is circumstantial evidence that bears do fool people with their appearances. Another popular theory discussed is the possibility it was an escaped ape. In fact, a rumor circulated that a gorilla had escaped from Hiroshima Zoo around 1970, though the zoo denied it. Notably, there's no indication whatsoever that this so-called Hiroshima ape escape was anything more than an urban legend. Further, there's nothing to indicate that this rumor had even circulated prior to the sighting of the Hibagon. All that said, an orangutan or chimpanzee on the loose could conceivably survive for a while in the woods. On the more supernatural side, some locals half-jokingly suggested the creature was a restless spirit of the mountain. The sightings coincided with construction on Mount Heba, leading to whispers that the mountain's guardian god sent the creature as a warning. Others thought that this construction may have driven bears and monkeys out of their usual habitat, leading to the unusual sightings. Despite extensive searches and media attention, the Hibagon was never captured or scientifically verified. No photographs beyond the blurry 1974 snapshot ever emerged, and no carcass or definitive DNA evidence was found. With no new evidence and the sightings long ended, most conclude the Hibagon likely had a mundane explanation. The consensus is that it was most likely a known creature seen under unusual conditions, and then amplified by rumors and excitement. On the night of September 7th, 1988, University of Arizona student Diane Abel vanished from her dorm room in Tucson. She had returned to her room around 1:30 a.m., but by sunrise, Diane was nowhere to be found. Her alarm clock rang continuously that morning, prompting her roommate to check on her, only to find Diane's bed empty and her purse and keys still there. There was no sign of forced entry and nothing to suggest she had planned to leave. Overnight, an ordinary college evening had turned into the start of a terrifying mystery. Campus police were alerted immediately, and an investigation began in the pre-dawn hours. Diane, 24, was a responsible business major, so friends and family knew something was wrong when she missed her classes and appointments. Authorities searched the campus and city for any trace of her, but the early investigation yielded few clues. Sadly, that break would come in the worst way imaginable. 5 weeks after Diane disappeared, on October 13th, 1988, two hunters stumbled upon skeletal human remains in a remote desert area northwest of Tucson. Dental records soon confirmed the worst. It was Diane. Her death was officially ruled a slaying, though the exact manner was never released to the public to preserve the integrity of the investigation. The Pima County Sheriff's Department took over the case. Detectives were left to grapple with the urgent questions of how Diane died and who had left her in the desert. Forensic clues were scant, as weeks of desert exposure had likely destroyed nearly all evidence. As investigators pieced together Diane's final hours, one lead stood out. On the evening of September 7th, Diane had been at a popular Tucson bar called the Bum Steer with a young man known only as Doug. She had met Doug about 2 weeks earlier, and they had been casually seeing each other. Witnesses noted that Doug drove a red pickup truck with New York license plates and said he was visiting a brother named Dave in town. He was the last person seen with Diane before she vanished, making him the prime person of interest. Investigators desperately wanted to locate this man. Police circulated composite sketches of Doug in the local newspapers and urged anyone who recognized him to come forward. Detectives stressed that they needed to talk to this mystery man, whether as a witness or a suspect, but he had already slipped away. No one ever provided a real name or identity for Doug, and law enforcement never tracked him down. Despite extensive efforts, the trail went cold. With their most promising lead evaporated and no physical evidence tying anyone to the crime, Diane's case began to stall out. The strongest and most persistent theory in Diane's case is that Doug, the man last seen with her, was directly involved in her disappearance and death. Doug wasn't a shadowy figure in the background. Rather, he was someone Diane had been casually seeing. Witnesses placed them together at a Tucson bar, the bum steer, the night she vanished. He reportedly drove a red pickup with New York plates and told people he was visiting a brother named Dave. But when Diane was reported missing, neither Doug nor Dave came forward. The question of who Doug really was is central to the case. It's unclear to what extent anything Diane knew about his identity was true, and it remains a possibility that the story about visiting his brother may have just been a cover. More than 30 years later, the mystery surrounding Diane's abduction and slaying endures. Her case received little in the way of any attention beyond some local newspaper stories at the time, and doesn't appear to have reached any wider audience whatsoever at the time. This is problematic given that Doug was temporarily in town from New York, if the official narrative he told was actually the truth. It may be that Doug was simply unaware of what happened to Diane, and then went back to New York. This was, of course, in the days before cell phones and the internet. If someone you were only tangentially and casually seeing just dropped off the face of the earth, there wouldn't be too much you could do to follow up. If his brother was truly in the area, as he claimed, the brother may not have put two and two together and informed Doug about Diane. As with any cold case such as this, an increase in public attention may be what gets the resources assigned to the case to finally crack it. Perhaps Doug isn't the perpetrator, but rather someone who could crack the case wide open, if only he knew that Diane was missing. Notably, in 2024, 36 years after Diane's death, the Pima County Sheriff's Office announced that it was re-examining the cold case with fresh eyes. It's unclear what new evidence they're looking at, or if they have the perpetrator's DNA. If they do have biological evidence from the perpetrator, it may only be a matter of time before there's a breakthrough in the case. Shirley Brandt was a 49-year-old mother of four and a successful real estate broker in North Miami Beach, Florida. She was known as an extremely driven businesswoman who had established one of the most successful real estate agencies in the area. On June 13, 1986, Shirley's life was cut tragically short. Shirley was working in her office, the Brandt Realty Corporation, and speaking on the phone when two strangers walked in. The men were conspicuously well-dressed, wearing dress pants and collared shirts, perhaps to pass as clients and avoid arousing suspicion. An employee in the office later told police she heard Shirley suddenly scream, then saw one of the men attempting to wrestle the phone away from her. A shot rang out, and Shirley Brandt was struck at point-blank range. The two assailants grabbed Shirley's purse, escaping with cash and her credit cards, before fleeing the scene. Critically wounded, Shirley was rushed to hospital, but she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arrival. North Miami Beach police initially launched an intensive investigation in the wake of the slaying. Investigators canvassed the area and even distributed thousands of flyers with the perpetrator's description in hopes of generating leads. The crime appeared to be a robbery turned slaying, and the fact that Shirley's credit cards were stolen but never used eliminated one potential trail for detectives to follow. Crucially, police did recover fingerprints from the scene, and keep this in mind, because this isn't a case that will be solved by cutting-edge forensic science. However, at the time in 1986, those latent prints were not entered into any automated database. According to North Miami Beach Police, the prints didn't meet certain criteria for submission to the automated fingerprint identification system back then. In the 1980s, forensic technology and databases were far more limited than today, so the prints remained on file but unmatched. With no immediate hits on suspects and scant physical evidence beyond the unusable fingerprints, the investigation struggled, and months passed with no updates. Despite the Brandt family's persistent push for answers, the case gradually went cold as the leads dried up, and one by one the original detectives retired. Shirley's family never forgot the tragedy, and they never stopped seeking justice. Her husband, local dentist Dr. Lawrence Brandt, was especially resolute. He spent a fortune hiring private investigators to ensure no stone was unturned, but these efforts appear to have come to nothing, aside from keeping the case on police radar. It turns out this consistent attention on Shirley's case would pay dividends, but not until many years down the line. And then, just like that, nearly 40 years had passed. In 2024, the long dormant case was revived by having a fresh look at the evidence with an old set of eyes. The North Miami Beach Police Department's Cold Case Unit launched a renewed investigation into Shirley Brandt's slaying. Notably, they brought two retired detectives who had worked on the original case, Sergeant Pamela Denham and Sergeant Yvette Darden. These seasoned investigators volunteered to pore over the old evidence, determined to crack one of the city's longest-running unsolved cases. During the cold case review, Denham, Darden, and the team re-examined the latent fingerprints collected at the crime scene. This time, using modern forensic technology, they submitted the prints to the National Fingerprint Database. In March 2025, a stunning result came back. The prints from Shirley's office matched an individual's records. After decades of uncertainty, police had a name. The fingerprint identified Jeffrey Taylor, a 64-year-old man living in Liberty City, Miami. Taylor was 26 years old at the time of Shirley Brandt's slaying. At the press conference announcing the arrest, the North Miami Beach police chief described Taylor as a, quote, career criminal with a long history of offenses. Back in 1986, Taylor's name had never come up in the Brandt investigation. He wasn't an acquaintance of Shirley's, and the robbery appeared to be a random attack. Police alleged that Jeffrey Taylor was the man who pulled the trigger on that fateful day in 1986. According to investigators, Taylor and his accomplice had burst into Shirley's office intending to rob her. When Shirley resisted by refusing to hang up the phone and tried to get help, a struggle ensued and Taylor fired the shot. After the shooting, the two men grabbed what they could, cash and credit cards, and bolted, leaving Shirley mortally wounded on the office floor. For nearly 4 decades, those men remained unidentified, but now, at least one of them had a face and a name. The second suspect, however, has never been identified, and police have affirmed that the investigation remains open as they continue to hunt for the other man involved. Some have speculated that Taylor will hold back this information as leverage, given the severity of the crime he's accused of, and given that the existence of an accomplice is confirmed. On April 24, 2025, a team of officers moved to finally bring Jeffrey Taylor into custody. He was arrested and charged with second-degree slaying in Shirley Brandt's passing. Because this was an open warrant on a case of this nature, the court ordered that Taylor be held without bond. Nearly 40 years after Shirley's life was taken, the accused perpetrator will now face justice in a courtroom. For the time being, however, Taylor remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. On January 12, 1993, a man out for a walk in the woods in Orlando, Florida, made a grim discovery near the intersection of Heather Road and Dennis Avenue. The skeletal remains of an adult male were found lying in the underbrush. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene after the passerby hurried to a nearby store to call authorities. Investigators noted the victim was a white male, approximately 5'10", and estimated to be between 45 and 55 years old. The deceased man was wearing a blue tank top, blue jeans, and socks, but carried no identification of any kind. From the start, deputies treated the area as a crime scene, and a forensic examination confirmed that the man had been slain with a single shot to the head. In the weeks and months following the discovery, Orange County detectives scoured missing person reports and forensic records, hoping to match the John Doe to someone reported missing. The timing seemed like it should have been a crucial clue. The remains were found in early 1993, and indeed a local man had been reported missing just a couple of weeks before the discovery. In fact, Greg Carpenter had last been seen alive on December 26, 1992, and his family reported him missing to the Orlando police that very same day. This was only 17 days before the unidentified body was found. Yet, despite this proximity of the reports and the fact they were in the same jurisdiction, authorities at the time didn't manage to connect the cases. It's unclear why exactly this was, since Greg Carpenter fit the profile of the John Doe exactly. Over the years, law enforcement compared the John Doe's profile against nationwide missing persons, but no match was found. With limited technology in the early 1990s, investigators had exhausted traditional methods. Fingerprints were impossible due to decomposition, and DNA profiling was in its infancy. They relied on dental records and missing persons flyers, but nothing panned out, and there was official speculation that he may have been a tourist who never made it home. The case file lingered in the cold case unit, periodically revisited as technology improved. However, without a name, solving the case itself was next to impossible. Detectives had little to go on regarding motive or suspects. The manner of death, an execution-style shot, suggested the possibility of an illicit business dispute gone horribly wrong. But again, authorities could only speculate. In the late 2010s, Orange County cold case detectives began reviewing old John and Jane Doe files to see if DNA technology could shed new light. In 2022, they partnered with Othram to attempt to crack the case with genetic genealogy. With this profile in hand, Othram's in-house team searched for relatives by comparing the victim's DNA to profiles uploaded in public genealogy databases. Before long, they found genetic matches to distant relatives of the John Doe. These leads were handed back to Orange County investigators, and the detectives on the case then conducted a follow-up investigation, contacting potential family members. In 2024, Orange County detectives announced that the 30-year mystery had been solved. The remains were positively identified as Greg Carpenter, born in 1947. Greg Carpenter was not a mysterious stranger after all. He was a 44-year-old Orlando man who had vanished during the 1992 Christmas season. Born into a military family in 1947, Carpenter had spent much of his life in Central Florida, graduating from a local high school. When he disappeared on December 26, 1992, his family immediately knew something was wrong and filed a missing persons report. Sadly, they would spend the next 31 years without answers, and in the meantime, Carpenter's parents passed away, not knowing his fate. With Greg Carpenter's identity confirmed, the Orange County Sheriff's Office officially reclassified the file from an unidentified person case to an active investigation. In July 2024, they publicly announced Carpenter's name and appealed for new information about the circumstances of his death. Detectives are now piecing together Carpenter's last known activities in late 1992. It's known that he spent Christmas Day 1992 with family or friends, but details have not been released beyond those basic facts, and what ended up happening afterward remains a mystery. Investigators are pursuing leads to determine who Carpenter was with when he disappeared, and any possible motives for his slaying. Because the case is over 30 years old, potential witnesses' memories have faded, and some individuals who knew Greg might be hard to find. Nevertheless, authorities are hopeful that someone, somewhere has information that could further crack the case. They have urged anyone who knew Greg Carpenter or has knowledge whatsoever about his life to come forward. They've stressed that even seemingly small details about his relationships, business dealings, or habits could provide the clue needed to identify a suspect. At present, we don't know what steps investigators have taken, but we can speculate about other forensic techniques that could be used. Investigators could use isotopic and elemental bone analysis to pinpoint Greg's geographic movements before his passing. This may reveal where he lived or traveled in the months leading up to December 1992. This could be coupled with forensic palynology, the science of analyzing microscopic pollen or soil grains still trapped in his clothing. This, of course, assumes that the clothing was preserved and not contaminated afterwards. Combining these two avenues of forensic science could allow the authorities to unlock personal connections outside the Orlando area. For example, it could indicate that he was in a certain region of Texas, and the authorities could spread word of his identity there through the local news and social media. Another potential avenue is to reinvestigate the crime scene for further clues that may have been missed. For instance, the authorities could retain forensic archaeologists and conduct ground-penetrating radar scans to determine if there are any abnormalities in the area where Greg was found. While this is a long shot, especially given the passage of time, it could yield the one clue that cracks the remainder of the case wide open. Forensic accountants could also be retained to examine his financial interactions for any irregularities, or at least to find further social or business connections. However, this again may be difficult given the passage of time and the destruction and loss of records over the decades.